If you've ever been to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., you've probably seen this painting, Thomas Sully's Lady with a Harp. It's rather hard to miss, 7 feet tall, towering over you, and dominating a full wall. And when you saw it, you probably thought that it looked familiar. It's a painting that's been used on everything from the covers of Jane Austen novels, to Neo-Regency romances, to shower curtains and concert posters. It's an iconic American painting, and one of the most popular in the National Gallery's collection. But who is the lady in the painting?
Thomas Sully's Lady with a Harp is not a fantasy painting of a studio model. It shows real-life Baltimore resident Eliza Eichelberger Ridgely, at age 15, playing a single-action Naderman harp. Although only teenaged in the painting, Eliza would go on to become one of the most distinguished American women of the 19th century, an accomplished musician, socialite, businesswoman, and horticulturalist. She also networked like nobody's business, rubbing shoulders with the families of U.S. presidents and corresponding with the Marquis de Lafayette. Yes, that same Revolutionary War hero with all the snappy comments in Hamilton. She was also a talented singer, pianist, and of course, a harpist.
Eliza Ridgely not only owned the first modern concert harp in the United States, but also amassed an impressive collection of rare music. How impressive? More than 450 pieces in her music library, putting the Ridgely family music collection in competition with the John Adams family and Thomas Jefferson family collections for the largest and most important early American music collections. The contents of her music library illustrate the different streams of foreign culture entering the United States that became collected and integrated into an evolving cosmopolitan identity that became called American. Portrait paintings capture not just a moment in time, but also an idealized image of or idea about the sitter. How well that ideal resembled you depended a lot on your painter. Selecting Thomas Sully for the job wasn't a casual decision. Eliza wrote to her father in Baltimore to discuss the commission and Sully's ideas, but the final choice was definitely a shrewd one. In 1818, Thomas Sully was a rising star, on his way to become America's most famous and most popular portrait artist, famous for capturing the essence of those he painted. Sully's portrait of Eliza presents her as elegant, musical, and touched with mischievousness. It makes a statement not just because it's beautiful, but also because it's gigantic, on scale with the great history paintings of the day and Sully's full-length portraits of George Washington, Benjamin Rush, and other icons of the American Revolution.
At a time when the most common personal portrait, especially of women, was a miniature, Lady with a Harp stands out. It's a bold assertion that Eliza, as an American woman, was a product of a culture just as sophisticated as that in Europe. Nor is the harp in the painting just any harp. It's a Naderman, decorated in the Louis XVI style, the same type played by Marie Antoinette when she reigned as Queen of France. For many well-to-do American women of the period, playing the harp and singing were two of the ultimate social skills and considered markers of a strong education. As Thomas Sully noted in his diary, he had to paint people doing and wearing things that others recognized. This wasn't something that you could just fake. Otherwise, one's friends could easily see through the deception. For instance, wearing too fancy a dress or posing with an instrument you didn't know how to play. The musician captured in the painting reflects Eliza's years of musical study, including a drive to win musical competitions that not only brought home a prize, but also letters from her father chiding her not to practice into the wee hours of the night.
Like many American portraits, Lady with a Harp was shown at a public exhibition soon after it was finished, and then vanished into the Ridgely family's private holdings, where it remained for more than 125 years. Today, however, anyone can enjoy the painting for free at the National Gallery of Art and think about this fascinating individual. You can even visit Eliza's longtime family home at the Hampton National Historic Site in Towson, Maryland, just north of Baltimore, and see the garden she designed, the dining hall where she entertained, and the music room where select guests could hear the rare songs that Eliza collected from the court of the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte I.
There's a contemporary term that works very well to describe Eliza Eichelberger Ridgely. An it girl, someone who fascinated those around her not just for her beauty, but also for her wit and intelligence, her amiability, command of the room, and more. She possessed a je ne sais quoi that eluded easy description or traditional categories. Eliza turned heads, fascinated listeners, and spoke effortlessly about botany, philosophy, poetry, or even managing a large farming estate, and, of course, charmed ears with her music. She was a Renaissance woman, a trendsetter who defied her contemporaries' ideas about what a woman could be.
In the early 19th century, much of the most popular music in the United States consisted of theater songs from light comic operas imported from Great Britain. As a student at Miss Lyman's Academy in Philadelphia, Eliza was just down the street from the city's major music publishers, which printed song after song for a musically hungry public. Many of these pieces were of lower quality, hastily written and by self-taught composers, and most of them are, thus, largely forgotten. Eliza, however, showed a discriminating taste as a student, carefully picking select musical pieces for the harp, fortepiano, and voice to purchase or copy by hand. She and her cousin Henrietta Eichelberger created paired books of hand-copied music so that they could sing duets and accompany each other in different performances.
After completing her studies at Miss Lyman's Academy, Eliza returned to her native Baltimore, where many well-to-do men, fascinated by this talented and accomplished young woman, soon besieged her with offers of marriage. In an earlier decade, she might have acquiesced. Eliza, though, was part of a new generation of American women who increasingly saw music and education not as a way to get a husband, but as a valuable avenue for self-empowerment and personal fulfillment. Eliza politely rejected a succession of would-be suitors, instead investing her time in advanced musical study with a pair of recently arrived musicians, John Nenninger, a German immigrant who would go on to become the music director of Baltimore's Roman Catholic Cathedral, and Henri Noël Gilles, a French multi-instrumentalist who had worked as an oboist in the personal music entourage of Napoleon I of France.
Remember those 450-odd pieces of music in Eliza's collection? Unlike many of her contemporaries, Eliza's tastes were both exclusive and wide-ranging. To the theater songs and piano pieces enjoyed by her classmates, she added French music brought to Philadelphia by war refugees from Haiti, the opening of a lively Caribbean-American musical exchange that continues today, and which has introduced the sounds of reggae and steel pan drums to American popular music. Many of these French songs were printed with added English texts, much as the song Despacito from the United States, with an added English verse sung by Justin Bieber. A long-standing trait of American culture is that it absorbs and integrates elements from other cultures. When Eliza originally traveled abroad, she bought sheet music for performances that she saw, taking them to perform the music for friends and other guests in the United States, to entertain them and show them about her travels. The most rare music in the Ridgely family music collection, however, has a special story. When Napoleon led his armies across Europe, he also looted and collected art of all sorts: paintings, statues, furniture, and those who made this art, including musicians. Napoleon amassed a personal retinue of the best singers, instrumentalists, and composers from Spain, Italy, Germany, Russia, and more. After signing a peace treaty with Austria, for example, Napoleon was invited to a concert celebrating the peace, and then insisted on taking the concert's star singer-composer with him when the French army moved on. As gigs go, being paid to make music for an emperor wasn't bad money while it lasted, but when Napoleon fell from power, most of the musicians wisely decided that it was time to leave France. One of these was Henri Noël Gilles, who fled to the United States with his oboe and a collection of his own songs and music by the composers in Napoleon's entourage. For many years, Gilles was considered the finest, and, to some, the only competent oboist in the United States, being summoned regularly to New York City to play in orchestra concerts. But in 1820, no orchestra in the country employed musicians full-time. Just like many musicians today, Gilles had to travel widely for paying gigs and wore several professional hats to make ends meet. In Baltimore, he successfully advertised himself as a voice teacher, building a large studio of adult female students who were interested in both solo singing and performing the great choral works that they read about being performed in European cities. One of these students was Eliza Ridgely, who not only was interested in sharpening her musical abilities, but also knew many of Gilles' other students from the Baltimore social scene.
Gilles taught Eliza voice lessons and sold her handwritten scores from his music library. These songs, he could boast, were not only sung at the French imperial court, but also included special editions and ornaments sung by some of the greatest singers of the last decade, and which had even been taught to an empress. Many of these exquisite songs are so rare today that, aside from the Ridgely family music collection, only one or two other copies are known to survive. Gilles seems to have sold this music selectively, so as to not dilute its rarity, which helped give Eliza's performance a unique aura that only enhanced others' fascination.
The fascinating Miss Ridgely, wrote one diarist. The entrancing Miss Ridgely, wrote another. Dazzling, charming, exquisite, beautiful, and more. Especially because, if asked to perform at an event, she could not only sing, but also accompany herself on piano or harp. 4 years later, when the Marquis de Lafayette visited Baltimore during his tour of the United States, he met a 21-year-old Eliza who excelled in multiple areas of music, was broadly educated and fluent in French, and, if anything, even more dazzling than when she returned to Baltimore 3 years earlier. The Marquis, himself a great fan of French and Italian opera, wrote Eliza 10 letters following his visit, inviting her to come visit him in Europe and sending her recommendations on what operas to see.
One of the questions that often comes up in reading 19th century history is, where are all the women? For many reasons, the traditional narrative has mostly been written by and focused on the achievements of great men to the exclusion of those who don't fit that archetype. But read contemporary letters, diaries, and newspapers, and it quickly becomes clear that women, like Eliza Eichelberger Ridgely, were movers and shakers of their day. Why, though, have their stories only recently come to the forefront? Why have the Adams and Jefferson's music collections received so much study, while research on the Ridgeleys is only now starting?
Let's look back at the portrait again. It shows Eliza Eichelberger Ridgely at age 15, standing with her harp, contemplating something as she tunes it. It's a powerful, arresting visual, one that captures the idea of Eliza the musician. But what you see in the portrait is hardly the whole story of Eliza the person. A portrait that becomes iconic, that can be found on anything from postcards to shower curtains, can easily overshadow the full story of the person being portrayed. But with Eliza, we know that Lady with the Harp shows just the beginning of a rich and eventful life that spans 64 years. Focusing too much on the portrait, wonderful though it is, makes it easy to omit or forget the rest of her story. Eliza eventually took the Marquis de Lafayette up on his offer to visit, the first of several extended trips to Europe where she toured the great cities and sites that she read so much about. On the first trip, a schoolgirl interest in a botany lecture blossomed into a full-on vocation in horticulture. For the rest of her life, Eliza collected a dizzying array of exotic seeds, cuttings, and juvenile plants that she coaxed into growing in the Maryland climate, many of which she introduced to the United States for the first time. Walk the grounds of the Hampton National Historic Site, and you can see trees that she planted, including a massive cedar from Lebanon. Yes, as in the Cedars of Lebanon in the Judeo-Christian Bible. More than a few botanical gardens and horticultural centers trace parts of their collections back to her pioneering horticultural work. The European furniture and decorations that she brought back from Europe and made fashionable spurred the decorative arts movement in the United States.
Eliza was also a shrewd businesswoman, inheriting her father's business savvy and attention to detail, who honed these instincts through study and practice. After her marriage in 1828 to John Carnan Ridgely of Hampton, no relation, she helped manage the joint family's massive farming estate and sustained it through climate shocks, tumbling crop prices, and the vagaries of war. At a time when married women normally took a financial backseat to their husbands, she was an equal partner who could close business deals independently and, when necessary, pull strings to make things happen. During the American Civil War, she used her influence to rescue her son from a military prison, and afterwards, she gave financial support to many who had been ruined by the conflict. That's a lot of life that you don't get merely from a portrait, although, as you might guess, many of those astonishing events also made their mark in her music collection.
History is not a static thing. It is written by those who want to tell it about things that they see and recognize as important. Thomas Sully's iconic portrait, Lady with a Harp, shows the barest glimpse into the life, character, and accomplishments of Eliza Eichelberger Ridgely, an American woman who was a gifted singer, harpist, and pianist, but also much, much more.